You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision. It almost feels like engineering.
Right, yeah. Very mechanical.
Exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the film, and the doctor just points a pen at it and says, well, there it is.
It's binary data. I mean, it's clean, it's objective, and it's completely indisputable.
Right. You get a cast, you get a timeline for healing, and you know exactly what the physical road to recovery is going to demand of you. But then you step into the world of profound emotional trauma.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a whole different thing.
It really is. You step into the reality of deep grief, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just totally useless.
Yeah.
We're looking at a landscape that is completely murky. We're basically dealing with invisible fractures.
Because, I mean, how do you quantify the breaking of a human heart?
Mm-hmm.
There's no scan for that. It's a completely subjective, highly volatile terrain.
That invisible terrain is exactly what we are exploring today in this deep dive. We're looking through an incredibly raw, deeply personal essay.
Yeah, it's titled Grief and Hope, The Path of Mourning and Seeking the Lord.
And it was written by a rabbi. He's identified in the document's imagery under a few multilingual aliases, actually, including Frank Leo and Moshe Halevi. And he wrote this text following the death of his mother on August 8th, 2025.
And right at the beginning of the text, before you even get into the narrative of his loss, there is this striking visual detail.
Oh, the scripts.
Yes. The author's name is written out in 4 different scripts. It's in English, traditional Chinese, Hebrew, and Greek.
Which is such a compelling way to visually set the stage. I mean, you look at those overlapping identities, and it immediately grounds you in this realization.
What realization?
That while this is a highly specific, very personal loss, the language of grief really transcends all cultural and linguistic borders. It doesn't matter what language you read or speak. Grief is the one dialect every human being on Earth will eventually have to learn.
Wow, that is perfectly put. And the author starts his account right at the epicenter of that universal experience. He describes his mother's passing as leaving an unfillable void.
Yeah, those words are heavy.
Very deliberate. She wasn't just a parent in a biological sense. She gave him life, nurtured him, and essentially taught him what it means to be human.
And because of that magnitude of loss, he identifies himself using a really specific Hebrew phrase from Psalm 147.3. He calls himself Shavari Lev.
Which means one of the brokenhearted.
Exactly. And it's from this place of just absolute devastation that he points out something I think you, listening to this, will immediately recognize. He talks about how insulting our typical human responses to grief actually are.
Yes, the modern platitudes. He writes about feeling actively insulted when well-meaning people approach him and say things like, time will heal or it will pass.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I want to look at the mechanics of why those phrases are so incredibly damaging. Telling someone, this too shall pass, after a life-altering loss, fundamentally misunderstands the physics of their new reality.
How so?
Well, it's treating their grief like a passing fever. It assumes they will eventually return to their baseline temperature. But they haven't caught a cold, they've lost a limb, the baseline is permanently gone.
That is a great analogy. And the psychology behind why we default to those phrases is fascinating and honestly a bit indicting for all of us.
Indicting, like we know we're doing it wrong.
Kind of. I mean, we don't say time heals all wounds because it's medically or emotionally accurate. We say it because the rawness of someone else's grief makes us acutely uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, okay, it's like driving a car with a terrible grinding noise in the engine, and instead of fixing the engine, you just turn up the radio.
Exactly.
The problem is still there, but the driver feels better because they don't have to hear it anymore.
That is exactly it. These platitudes are the radio. They're designed to relieve the awkwardness of the comforter, not to soothe the person who was mourning. We are subconsciously trying to rush the mourner through their pain so that we don't have to sit in the heavy, crushing silence of it.
But the text contrasts our modern discomfort with a piece of ancient wisdom from the Mishnah, specifically Pirkei Avot 4.18. It instructs, and I love this, do not comfort him while his dead lies before him.
The ancient sages understood human psychology on such a profound level. They recognized that words are inherently cognitive tools. They require logic to process.
Right.
But fresh grief is not cognitive. It is entirely visceral. When the loss is that raw, the cognitive pathways are effectively shut down.
So throwing words at them is just useless.
Worse than useless, it's alienating. The sages are teaching that sometimes the most sacred response to fresh pain isn't language at all. It is total silence and unwavering physical presence. You don't try to fix it, you just stand in the wreckage with them.
But standing in the wreckage is hard, and that leads to a deeply troubling part of his essay. Because if generic phrases from acquaintances are insulting, what happens when the people closest to you completely fail?
You mean the ones who are supposed to stand in the wreckage with you?
Exactly. It creates this compound trauma. The author writes about turning to a close relative. This is someone who had previously told him, "Lean on me." It was an explicit invitation for support.
Right, he thought he had a safe harbor.
But when the author actually takes him up on it, when he tries to share the immense emotional pressure he's under, the relative completely snaps. The author writes that this relative interrupts him, yells at him, and then incredibly claims that his own stress is actually bigger than the author's.
Wow.
He gets competitive with the grief. I have to admit, reading that, I struggled to understand the reaction. Why would someone do that? Is shouting about your own stress just a defense mechanism because you are terrified of the weight of someone else's burden?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a failure of emotional capacity. When faced with the crushing weight of absolute despair, some people's emotional circuitry just overloads.
Like blowing a fuse.
Exactly. They panic. And to regain a sense of control in a helpless situation, they selfishly center themselves. But the source material offers a brilliant counter-narrative to this failure by bringing in a story from the Talmud, specifically Baruchat 5b.
I saw that Talmud story in the text involving Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Hia bar Abba, but honestly, I didn't quite get how a story about a sick rabbi relates to a family member shouting at you in your grief.
It's all about the methodology of comfort. Rabbi Hia is severely ill and suffering. Rabbi Yochanan goes to visit him and asks a very direct, almost provocative question. He asks, "Are your sufferings dear to you?"
That sounds a bit harsh.
It does. He's essentially asking if Haya is finding some sort of silver lining, some spiritual reward or lesson in this terrible pain.
So it's the ancient equivalent of asking, well, what is the universe trying to teach you?
Yes, exactly. It's an attempt to intellectualize the pain. And Rabbi, he completely shuts it down. He replies, neither them nor their reward.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, no, there is no bright side. This is just awful.
Good for him.
Right. Now, this is the crucial moment. Rabbi Yochanan could have argued. He could have compared pain and said, well, you think you're sick, let me tell you about my problem.
Like the relative did.
Precisely. But Yochanan doesn't do that. He accepts the reality of the darkness. The text says he simply says, give me your hand, and he physically lifts him up. True comfort isn't about lecturing or comparing or finding silver linings. It is simply offering a hand to bear the weight.
But in the author's reality, he didn't get that hand. The acquaintances offered him turning up the radio, and the family member offered him a raised voice. If human beings are this uniquely terrible at carrying the weight, how does he not just collapse entirely under the isolation?
Well, he is forced to look vertically instead of horizontally.
Vertically?
Yeah, in his total abandonment by humans, he turns to the divine. And the theological shift he makes here is incredibly specific. He quotes the prophet Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 13. God promises, and this is a direct quote, as one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you.
Oh, wow. That specific phrasing is so arresting. He has just lost the ultimate source of comfort in the physical world, the woman who literally gave him life and sheltered him. And the ancient text promises that the divine will step into that exact, hyper-specific void.
It's a deeply intimate view of the divine.
It really is. God doesn't say, I'll be your sovereign or I'll be your shield. God says, I will comfort you with maternal love.
And the author brings in some very nuanced linguistics to explain the mechanics of how this divine comfort actually reaches us. He points to Psalm 34.12, which says, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. He focuses on the Hebrew word for near, which is karov.
And how does karov function here?
Well, in Hebrew, karov shares a linguistic root with the word korban. Now, korban is typically translated in English text as a sacrifice or an offering, but its literal structural meaning is an act or an object meant to draw one closer to the divine.
Wait, really? So the concept of being near and the act of drawing close are intrinsically the same word?
Yes. And the profound takeaway here is the direction of the movement. Usually we think of religion as humanity trying to climb a mountain to reach God. But when your heart is shattered, when you are shvurei lev, you don't have the strength to climb.
You're depleted.
Exactly. You can't make a korban, so the mechanics reverse. God descends to you, he becomes karov right next to you. The mountain comes down to the valley because you are too broken to take a single step forward.
That is beautiful. Having found that grounding, having realized that he isn't actually alone in the room, The author naturally pivots to the metaphysical question. It's the question anyone who has ever stood at a graveside asks.
Right. Where is she?
Exactly. Where is she? What actually happened to the essence of the person I love?
For this framework, he turns to the Zohar, which is a foundational text of Jewish mysticism, or Kabbalah. Specifically, he references Parashat Vayechi. The Zohar teaches that the soul, the neshama, doesn't simply extinguish like a blown-out candle. It rises to a place of supreme light.
The text gets quite technical here, doesn't it? It lays out the Kabbalistic structure of the soul, breaking it into 5 distinct levels.
Right, the mystical tradition views the soul not as a single block, but as an ascending hierarchy of spiritual consciousness. You have nefesh, which is the basic biological vitality, then ruach, the spirit or emotional self.
Okay, so that's 2.
Third is neshama, the intellectual or holy soul. Fourth is chaya, the transcendent life force. And finally, the absolute highest, most distilled essence is called yechida, meaning the singular or unique one.
Hold on. I need to pause on that structure. Does that mean the text is suggesting a person is fractured into 5 different pieces upon death?
No, not fractured. Think of it more like a spectrum or a gradient of light. While you are alive in a physical body, all those levels are engaged, tethering your physical vitality, the nefesh, to your highest spiritual consciousness, the yechida. Upon death, the physical tethers fall away, and the focus shifts entirely to the ascent of those higher levels.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's basically a process of distillation.
Exactly. And according to this tradition, that highest, purest level, the yechida, unites directly with the Ein Sof. Ein Sof translates literally to the infinite. It is the boundless, endless light of the divine. The soul merges back into its ultimate source.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I was trying to visualize this, and instead of thinking about water drops, I thought about a fire.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. While we are alive, we are like a distinct, separate spark thrown off from a massive bonfire. We have our own little trajectory in the dark. But when we pass, that spark doesn't just go out. It is pulled back into the roaring central flame. It hasn't been destroyed. It's just returned to its origin. And by merging with that infinite fire, the spark itself becomes completely indestructible.
That is a highly accurate way to frame the Ein Sof. The mother's soul is secure, elevated, and indestructible within that light. But, the essay takes a very dark turn here.
It does.
Because knowing she is safe in the light doesn't magically fix his reality. He is still left in the cold dark, and the pain of remaining in the physical world without her is agonizing.
It's an incredibly raw admission. He talks about battling severe suicidal thoughts. The darkness of his grief is so overwhelming that the thought of his mother being in this beautiful, infinite light makes him want to end his own life just to escape the pain and reunite with her.
It is a profound crisis of survival. And he analyzes this internal struggle through the concept of the Yetzer Hara, which is typically translated as the evil inclination.
Yeah.
But the text frames this inclination in a highly sophisticated psychological way.
Yeah, this completely reframed the concept for me. We usually picture an evil inclination as a cartoon devil on your shoulder whispering at you to go rob a bank or hurt someone.
Right, like standard temptations.
Right. But here, the Yetzer Hara isn't pitching malicious crimes. It's pitching a false exit strategy. It's whispering that the grave is a quiet place to rest. It is weaponizing his own exhaustion against him.
Weaponizing his exhaustion. That is the perfect way to describe it. The inclination senses his vulnerability and tries to sell death as a refuge. But the author counters this deceptive whisper with the strict teachings of the Torah and the sages, which fiercely defend the sanctity of life.
How does he do that?
He quotes a chilling line from the Mishnah, Avot 4.22, which dismantles the romance of death entirely. It says, "Against your will you were formed, and against your will you live."
Meaning you don't get to opt out just because the curriculum got unimaginably hard.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder that Sheol, the grave, the underworld, is not a refuge or a hotel you can check into when you're tired. Your existence is bound to a higher divine architecture, not just your current emotional bandwidth.
So how does he actually anchor himself to the physical world when every instinct is screaming at him to leave?
He anchors himself to a specific translation, the Targum on Deuteronomy 30.19. The scripture reads, "I have set before you life and death. Choose life."
Choose life.
Right. For the author, this isn't just an inspirational quote on a coffee mug. It's a divine imperative. He chooses to live, not because the pain has miraculously vanished, but because the divine architecture commands it. And on a deeply personal level, he realizes that choosing to live is the ultimate honor he can pay to the woman who literally gave him that life. It is what his mother would want him to do.
It's an incredible triumph of the human spirit to make that choice. But choosing life means he has to wake up the next morning and the morning after that and consciously live alongside the void.
Yeah, the grief doesn't just end.
Exactly. The tears are still going to come. So we have to ask, does that mean his suffering is just pointless endurance? Is weeping just a biological glitch he has to put up with?
Far from it. The ancient texts provide a profound mechanical framework for why we cry. He looks again to the Zohar, specifically the portion of Teruma. It teaches that when a person is in deep anguish, the Holy One stands directly with them. Their tears are not falling onto empty ground.
I want to dig into the mechanics of that. The text shares this vivid quote: "The tears of the eyes break many gates and towers that had not been opened." How exactly does a physical tear break a spiritual gate?
Well, in mystical traditions, there's a concept that strict justice or divine judgment creates barriers or gates between humanity and the divine. Words, because they are intellectual, often bounce off these gates.
Because they're just logic.
Right, but tears are different. Tears are the rawest, most unedited expression of the nefesh and ruach, your vitality and spirit. They bypass the cognitive guards completely. They evoke profound divine mercy, literally altering the heavenly disposition and opening pathways that intellect and standard prayer simply cannot unlock.
Wow, that completely changes the value of crying. The author also references Psalm 56.9, where the psalmist says to God, "Put my tears in your bottle." The imagery implies that God is literally counting, collecting, and preserving our tears like a precious currency.
They are infinitely valuable.
So what does this all mean for you? If you are listening to this right now and you are navigating your own season of profound loss, this ancient wisdom offers a radical shift in perspective. Your tears are not a biological weakness.
Absolutely not.
They are not an inconvenience that you need to quickly wipe away so the people around you don't feel awkward. Your tears are doing heavy spiritual lifting. They are breaking down locked gates in realms you can't even see. Your grief isn't just pain, it is active, sacred work.
That elevates the entire experience of mourning from a state of passive victimhood into something deeply purposeful.
As we look at the entirety of this rabbi's journey, his final plea to anyone else out there who is suffering is incredibly clear.
What's the main takeaway there?
He is telling you, do not let the empty phrases and the terrible discomfort of other people dictate your reality. Do not let those who abandon you convince you that you are isolated. The divine mountain has come down to the valley to stand next to you, and the souls of those you love are indestructible, burning brightly in the eternal fire.
That's just incredibly powerful. And he beautifully crystallizes this entire theology in the closing lines of his essay. He finishes with a traditional memorial prayer called the El Ma'ale Rachamim. He asks for true rest for his mother's soul. But the specific imagery he focuses on is asking for rest, Bahola Asalas de la Shekinah, under the wings of the Shekinah, the divine presence.
Under the wing, Dan.
Think about the mechanics of that image. Wings. It evokes a mother bird fiercely and completely sheltering her young from a storm. It brings the entire narrative full circle in the most poignant way possible.
It really does.
The author lost his earthly mother, the very center of his world. But ultimately, he finds eternal, protective, maternal comfort resting under the literal wings of the divine.
From the broken X-ray machines of our human attempts at comfort to the sheltering wings of the divine, it is an extraordinary testament to survival. So, to you listening, we leave you with a final thought to mull over. The next time someone in your life is standing in the middle of that unfillable void, how will you respond? When they are shattered, will you reach for the radio dial to drown out your own discomfort with an empty phrase? Or will you embrace the silence, step into the wreckage, and simply offer your hand?